good afternoon on what is a bright, breezy and chilly day. It is Saturday, October the 30th. I'm back in the Read Nook with a nice hot cup of tea and a big box. So this arrived this week, so let's find out what is in here. See, quick slice of the knife along the side there, and then down one end. It's just taking a bit of time. There we go. There's the corner gone, and just one last slice. There we go. So what have we got here? Quite a large box. Whole stack of bubble wrap, which I won't show you because you don't need to see that. And at the bottom, let's move the box half of the way. Okay, so got that. Got a rattle there. And we have paperwork and pull open the bag, and we have this tin. And essentially, it's this Twilight 2000. Essentially what would be, I'm trying to think, 5th edition, 4th edition, 5th edition. I think probably 5th edition, published by Freely Press. Swedish publisher best known for Tales from the Loop, Mutant Year Zero, Symbaroum, and of course, most recently, the Aliens role-playing game. So it has, Free League of all publishers has published what was published a version of really of what was the most military of military role-playing games ever published. Back in '84. From Game Designers Workshop, and the setting essentially is there is a war in Europe that spreads worldwide, basically of Third World War, and a limited nuclear exchange both in Europe and between the USSR and the NATO allies, which has profound consequences, of course. And the player characters are members of the 25th Mechanized Division, something like that. And they are essentially soldiers from various forces, civilians and so on, attached to this unit in Poland. And after one last push, they are essentially abandoned by their command because essentially it's collapsed. And then the idea behind the game essentially was that you would travel around Poland, trying to find a way home, typically to America, where you would face its own problems because of the nuclear exchange, the damage that had done, and the breakdown in society. Now, it was heavily supported throughout its history. Numerous supplements, and then it would be transformed into basically a second and sort of third versions of Twilight 2000 from Games Designers Workshop before it was published. And each time, essentially, what it would do is it would be rewriting the history that would lead up to the Third World War, because essentially it was very quickly outdated. Because by the end of the 90s, by the end of the 80s, basically the Berlin Wall had fallen, Warsaw Pact was collapsed, and then the Soviet Union would be no more by the beginning of the 90s. So the threat was taken, that threat of nuclear war, which we all lived through during the 70s and 80s, was no more. And so essentially removed that existential dread, which we actually really did all feel at the time. And then later on, Games Designers Workshop went out of business in the 90s, and then it was Twilight 2013 was published by another company in I suppose about 10 years ago, and wasn't well received. But Free League is back with this with an unboxing. Well, sorry, with a new version using their Year Zero engine. Now, what I've seen is it's still based in Poland. It is, but it's also based in Sweden because that was also affected by the war, because the Russians invaded via Finland. And the aim so much is not necessarily to work your way home. You could still take those scenarios and run them as they were. Basically go from try and get across to Krakow and then up to the Vistula to Warsaw, and then hopefully, and then the way home you get on a train and you power that across Poland and Germany to basically an evacuation ship in Hamburg. You could take those and run this with using this, I'm sure, but here the emphasis is upon survival and building community, and that's a feature of a lot of Free League's games, especially their Year Zero games. So Mutant Year Zero is all about building community as you explore the world and you discover secrets and you bring back artifacts and you improve your home and make a civilization. And then they do the same in Vaesen, the role-playing game of facing a folkloric horror set in Scandinavia, whereas the community is actually the castle where you're living, and you improve that. You unlock areas of the castle, you build new features, and so on, or you renovate them. But here you do the same thing. You build a community and a fortress to ensure your survival, and it's more difficult because you have limited resources. Yes, you might have AK-47 or the current iteration of the advanced combat rifle and so on, but there's a limited supply of weapons. So I don't think, well, there is an almost infinite supply of weapons, but there's a limited supply of ammunition, and then food, and then means of generating electricity and fuel, and then heavy weapons, because you might start off with a tank, and that's great. But if you've not got enough fuel to send it anywhere, and you've got no no shells to fire from it, it's a lump of metal which isn't going anywhere. So let's actually get over, because essentially let's get into this, because I mean the interesting thing is that if you go back far enough, there were some terrible reviews of Twilight 2000, because essentially the idea that you could survive a nuclear war seemed impossible, and the game was very militaristic in tone, which is not surprising given the publisher it came from and their military experience, and they were war game designers. And I'm not denigrating. That's just basically just how the game, what influenced that game, and of course very American. So Marcus Roland, I think, wrote a scathing review in White Dwarf. It's certainly one of the most controversial reviews that appeared in the magazine in the 80s. But the other interesting thing about Twilight 2000 in this setting, which won't happen with this, because it's a different publisher, have the properties, is that this laid the foundation essentially for the role-playing game Twilight 2300, where Games Designers Workshop took the history from this game and then war-gamed it through essentially 300 years of history to create a role-playing game that was actually really interesting. So what's in this? I've waffled on about Twilight 2000 and I haven't really got one, so I'm sorry, the unboxing is really slow. But as I said, it is a case of I talk about a subject to the best extent of my knowledge, and that's what I'm doing. So open up. What we've got inside is what Paulie Kid would say sweeties, but I wouldn't, because that keeps it dry. Catalogue, okay, that's fine. And then here, so I'll unbox this one by one. We have essentially, here's the briefing at the start. Here's what's going on. Explanation of the situation as the game starts. As the game opens, it does the same situation. You are stranded in Europe. There isn't the command necessary to give you directions, to supply you. You have to survive on your own. And this harks back to the original Twilight 2000. This had this kind of document. So essentially, it describes, local forces. I think this is actually this looks to be for Sweden. Let's have a look. This is the city of Stockholm. This is the Swedish one. Obviously, that wasn't in the original Twilight 2000, but it's in this version. Okay, and then we've got a second one. And whereas this is this is Poland. Basically, players of the original game will recognise that map. So you've got basically order of battles information that these soldiers would know when they start play. So what's next? We've got some maps. Maps are always good. I do like maps. So we have basically building complexes of some kind. I don't know. So I'll just show you that. Go. And then bombed out, basically housing community. Larger structure, and we have a basically inner city community buildings with a basic garden in the middle. Then we have some kind of corporate building there. Okay, larger map. Oh, this is on this larger map. These are on nice stock paper. This is even on the study. You can tell by the way it folds. That's on nice paper. Okay, so right, we've got on side. So on one side, this is the region for running it around Sweden, and then on the back you have a similar map. Which shows you the area around Lodz and down to Krakow, I presume. Some character sheets, always useful. Oh, no, does the fun with cartography never end? So simple locations, crossroads, bend in the road. Forest and hills, basically woods and basically broken territory. Keep going, blimey. Lakeside, corner. So what you could do is, and then more roadside. So what you could do is that. So essentially, what you've got is the means to sort of create a wargaming element, because there is a strong wargaming element to this game. We have T-junction, basically bombed out house mansion sort of thing, isolated. Keep on going. Map after map after map. Housing complex, more housing complexes, more streets, bombed out of course, basically housing complex, more wilderness, and that's the end of the maps. But have you not had enough maps? Then we have the counters, just the one sheet, that's enough. Then we've got, just trying to, there's so much in this box. Basically, it's actually quite a big box, so it's actually sitting quite uncomfortably on my knees. So we open up, and here's the referee manual, role-playing in the World War III that never was. So what's different about this, I mean, amongst other things, is the fact that it's still set in the year 2000. It's an alternate history. It's an alternate history of the past. When the original game came out, it was the future, and it could have happened. It never happened. This is what happened in that alternative future. So we have a description. Basically, we're going to open up with a list of backers, and then I would say the book is I would say the book is slightly foxed there. It would have been nice if it had been hardback. Grumble. But essentially, we go into chapter 1, the road to war. How we got there, got to the terrible events, and basically that covers for the period from 1989, and it does take in the fall of the Berlin Wall and goes up to the year 2000, and it's only a couple of pages long, but it sets everything up, and then we have a description of what it's like in central Poland with a smaller version of that map. We've got the order of battle in Poland, because essentially these are the forces the player characters will meet and have to deal with. So that's quite extensive. We do the same for Sweden. And there's a mystery of Gotland there, which essentially basically basically the US Marine Corps stationed a SAM site, and nobody knows what happened to the people on that unit. So we've got the Swedish order of battle, the remaining order of battle. Other countries, Germany, France, United Kingdom, America, rest of the world are all covered, sort of like in brief overview. And then we go into, and again, to capture the feel of the setting, great artwork, full colour spreads, and then we have more individual pieces which are, I would say, they're a little bit more cartoony in their style and colouring, but they're not cartoonish artwork. But still good artwork, and it basically this is your job, just guesses your job as the referee, and gauging the position, handling encounters, and again, in the ruins of a city, there's a tank, and you've got the soldiers there hiding, and it's all very sort of Call of Duty. I've got a list of encounters from booby-trapped vehicle, full tank, hungry and angry, shoot on sight, house on fire, stray dogs, rabid dogs, garage, forecourt, nice illustrations, as I say, and things, basically stuff like that. So extensive encounters, rumours, and then factions and forces. You break down in more detail. So Poland, so you have things like 5th Infantry Division, which is the let's have a look. It's the US version, 3rd Armoured Cavalry, and its goals and so on. Then we have the Soviet Reserve Group, its goals, and again, great artwork. And we have also things like the Jagged Sword, a faction type, Marauders, because they now exist, and it does the same for Sweden. And then we have factions in Sweden like the Admiral, who is the commander of the Soviet Baltic Fleet, who has survived. Then we have general organisations as well, the Shepherd's Flock. So you've got numerous factions and forces for the player characters to interact with. What the GRU and the KGB is doing in the region. There's an explanation of that. Then scenario sites. So we have locations like the prison. A breakdown is essentially. Oh yeah, there's the map. Basically, there's the map I showed you. That's the prison complex. Who's there, what they're doing, and you role play and what sort of war game that out, because you're using the counters and the maps. And then we have basically a town. You've got a town with a town hall, police station, a high school, the America town. Basically, it's just your average town under the protection of American soldiers. So here we go. And the other game that I'm kind of being that feels familiar with this, and certainly in terms of the maps and the counters and so on, is The Price of Freedom, which was another controversial role-playing game from the 1980s, and again got a scathing review in White Dwarf. But that's actually not as bad as everyone says it is. It's very playable. and it's a satire. It's written as a satire first and foremost, however you play it. So you've got numerous encounters in here, as well as a scenario site generator, and there's even solo rules in here, and conversion rules. Okay, so essentially you've got conversion rules. You can easily convert PCs, NPCs, weapons and vehicles from 1st and 2nd editions of Twilight 2000 to, this is the 4th edition. Okay, so essentially the 1st edition was the GDW version that came out in 1984, and then it moved to the GDW House Rules Twilight 2000, that would be 2nd edition, which you recognise from the bright yellow cover. And then the 3rd edition would have been Twilight 2013. And then we've got designer's notes at the end as well. So this is just a player's book. Okay, short index. And then let's have a look at the player's manual. Let's see if I can get this out of the box. So also what you've also got in the box, you have you've got a set of that's the initiative cards, and you've got encounter cards as well. There we go. And dice for the game. Okay, and it's the year 0 zone, so you're rolling d6, 6-sided dice, and hoping to get the right essentially the right symbols on it to succeed. So let's put that down, and I can show you the player's book. So here we go. And again, really great artwork. I really like this artwork. It's grim, but it feels realistic. And here we go. And essentially for the player, it starts off, you're on your own now, and you've got a deserted landscape with a battlefield with a crashed, destroyed tank and soldiers lurking there, hoping to find something they can scavenge. So this drops you into just what the game's about, what the player does, the referees do, as usual. Okay, and what do? Okay, well, essentially, what do? Stay alive, help those in need, search for information, find a safe haven, stake a claim, find a way home, reset the world. There's all those opportunities. That's a very typical post-apocalyptic setting, but in Twilight 2000, unlike a lot of post-apocalyptic role-playing games, the immediacy is now. The post-apocalyptic happened last year. You are the survivors. And then it talks about the campaign framework, where you can be civilians, law enforcement, mixed group, and so on, even prisoners, as well as military. And then we go on to the player characters. And you can play characters of different nationalities and branches, and have different ranks, which can come into play if you're still doing the military aspect of the game. And you can join, basically, military ranks included listed are for the US Army, the Soviet Army, Polish Army, and the Swedish Army, depending on which way you're setting your campaign. The characters have obviously skills, specialities, coolness under fire, a moral code, big dreams, your buddies, and how you met, that sort of thing to define them. And we'll get on to the roles that you can play. So we have different archetypes. So we have the civilian and the grunt, the gunner and the kid. They can all do, and basically they're all different characters, the types of characters that can appear. The mechanic, the medic, and there's 4 details. And essentially, this is very typical of freely designed, have these archetypes, and they're very atypical characters, and it's up to the players to adjust them as necessary, and that really works. You have the officer, the operator, basically the special forces, soldier, the spook. Okay. And I'm sure there'll be expansions where you can play other types of characters. I once played in a Twilight 2000 game an X-Fighter pilot. I have to say, absolutely bloody useless, because essentially he never got to fly again. But again, characterization, you've got life paths which generate characters' career, whether that's full-time military, life as civilian, or civilian and then military and then post-apocalyptic setting, and that all helps. And there's more background, and you've got images essentially of like troops from the different forces, so Soviet forces, US, Polish, Swedish, and so And then you have requirements, such as basically whether or not you basically part of the career paths. So you could be a police officer, a detective, a member of the SWAT team, or crime, which would be gang member, burglar, hustler, or prisoner. And again, they're all options which you can come across as part of the life path. And the life path element wasn't present in the first edition, as far as I'm aware. I can't remember that far back. It's been a while since I looked at it, but it was present in the second edition. And you would go through like a series of 4 year terms to get to the point where you would join the military. And you've also got options for education and white collar here. And then you develop your character, learning from experience, skills and specialities, rolling dice, and again you use the year zero system, which is fast and easy. And the thing is with this is Twilight 2000 is always a deadly game, but this we're playing. You bring in automatic high-tech weapons, even the ones that are surviving in a post-apocalyptic world, and the setting is not one where you necessarily want to rush into combat. You're going to get killed all too easily. Use on the battle maps, and you basically every turn you get an explanation of how combat works. Rounds and initiative, slow and fast actions. You have basic characters have a fast action and a slow action each turn. And again, to reinforce the kind of the war game sort of sensibility there of using it, the counters down on the map, and I can see that really working well on a VTT kind of system, basically for online play. And again, I do like this artwork, the ruined buildings, the sniper in place. It's what okay, and so on. And it goes up, and it does deal with all types of ammunition, so on, critical injuries and things like that. So it is deadly, and it does. You've got the effects of chemical warfare, unfortunately, but I mean, and radiation, and vehicle combat, and that's where the game's going to get kind of complicated, because it always was complicated when in vehicle combat. It would take a while. Because it was written as war game rules ultimately, and it wasn't. It wasn't necessarily fun if you really just wanted to get on and roleplay. I mean, combat's fun when you're playing it, but it's not sort of like you necessarily want to do. You always want to do it all the time. So we've got basically some nice examples in there. There we go. And then you've got an extensive list of weapons, vehicles, and gear. Now. Twilight 2000 always was kind of one of those books where role-playing games where you wanted gear and more of it. We start off with melee weapons, okay? And the first thing is bottle. I mean, isn't that fantastic? The idea is like improvised weapon, bottle. That's going to be common enough. I mean, you get things to do with clubs, spiked backs, bayonets, machetes, and knives, and so on. But yeah. Then we have bows and thrown weapons, and then we get on to things like civilian arms, so service revolver, police pistol, combat pistol, essentially pipe guns and lever action rifles and so on, semi-automatic shotgun. So the sort of weapons are going to be in the hands of the civilians if they're not scavenging weapons from the military. We have pipe gun, shotgun, zip gun, essentially the homemade guns as well, before we get into the US military weapons, which are going to be the M16, the M4, which would have been the weapons of the day, and then the actual military weapons. And I've got my favourite guns on here is the M21 battle rifle. And why basically I say it's my favourite, I've never fired it, basically I've used it in first-person shooters, and it's always fun. It's always a fun weapon, or essentially to use in play. Then we've got Soviet weapons, and it's doing the same kind of thing. And these are all the basic types of weapons you would get in the year 2000. And these are all fantastically well illustrated. Nice little bit of text and all the stats. And we have Swedish military weapons as well. So they're going to be less familiar to most players. the Soviet and the US weapons are going to be a bit more familiar. And then we've got Polish military weapons, which are not dissimilar to the Soviet ones, but they did create their own weapons. There we go. Basically, you've got other military weapons in there, like the Uzi and the VZ-61 Scorpion and the FAMAS for the French forces and the FNFL. For the basic for other orders of battle, just checking. Doesn't have the current Lee Enfield weapon used by the British Army. Fine, okay, we could probably come up with another in another book, which would have been in service at that time, I think. And then we could do this. It does exactly the same thing for vehicles. I'm not going to show you all of those, but you can see the artwork and the explanation of the weapons and the stats and so on, all there. Everything is there for basically for player characters, and it does the same kind of thing for basically and the NPCs, and it does the same sort of thing for body armor and other equipment. And then it has the rules for the home base, and this goes back to the thing about building something for your basically building something to live for as the player characters. And then the difficulties of travel are also dealt with in here: mishaps, forced march, driving, and so on, because you're going to go out and exploring, and it's going to be difficult, and that's very typical of a Year Zero engine game. And it comes back to things like Forbidden Lands is one where travel is important, and how it's done is important, and the same again for Mutant Year Zero, where there are dangers on the way everywhere. So that is everything in the Twilight 2000 boxed set. It's a fantastic tin. It's great. I'm really impressed by just how much you get in here. And the thing is, I'm looking forward to playing this. Not necessarily because I am necessarily how can I put it, a military junkie, as it were. I'm sort of interested, and I always have been. But I think it's a case of I'm interested because of the role-playing possibilities of what it presents. It's the survival. It's dealing with the immediate situation. It's not going out and marauding and killing things. Really, it's not very interesting. I think this offers a lot more than that. And the other great thing about this is, even if you just have the standard box set, which has got this line and not the tin, then there's a lot to play with in here. In the core set, in the original book, essentially you had like a basic beginning scenario. Essentially travel towards Krakow and have encounters and so on. In this, you have places you can encounter. You have basically locations and so on you encounter on the way. There's no actual scenario in there, but there's plenty of material to build a campaign with, which is fantastic. I think this is a really great, this looks really great. I think this is going to be a big hit. I'm hoping they're going to do a campaign of some kind for it, because Free League do great campaigns. And they're going to give this their support, not necessarily really on lots of new tech gear and weapons and stuff, which really isn't that necessary. It's stuff to tell stories with, I think, which is really where this is going to shine. And I think this is going to be, you're going to be able to tell great stories with this. You're going to be able to create interesting characters and tell of their survival. So yeah, this is the Twilight 2000 tinned set. 4th edition of the game from Free League Publishing, released this week. Okay, for Kickstarter backers, and if you've not got a copy, wait for it to get into the shop and grab one. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Anyway, in the meantime, this has been an incredibly long unboxing in the Nook. I don't think I've done one as long as this, but thank you for sticking with me. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please do click the like button down below. And if you've got any comments or feedback, I appreciate you posting them, and basically I do take the time to read them. And lastly, if you want to see me with a box and a game which I am going to basically unbox and take out its package and talk about to the best extent of my knowledge for, well, not 10 minutes in this case, but 35 minutes, all accompanied of course by a nice hot cup of tea. Or in this case, since it's now cold because it's 35 minutes, then please do hit that subscribe button. Again, thank you very much for watching and sticking with me on this video. I'll be back again soon with another unboxing video. Bye for now.